Amaka was a quiet village girl who had just married Obinna, a man from the city. One evening in Enugu, during a family dinner, she dared to speak up and share a simple idea. But Obinna didn't like that. He believed women should stay silent. In a burst of anger, he poured boiling water on her, burning her face and arms. She screamed in pain, but Obinna's family told the doctor it was just an accident. They warned Amaka to stay quiet or be sent back to the village in shame. Hurt and afraid, she said nothing, but deep inside, she started planning. Late at night, while Obinna slept, Amaka whispered into her cheap phone, recording everything: his threats, his mother's cruelty, her fear. She hid the recording in a secret folder. One day, with help from a kind nurse, Amaka escaped to Lagos and found a women's shelter. There, for the first time, people believed her. In court, Obinna denied everything, until Amaka played the audio. His threats echoed in the room. The judge gave her justice. Obinna lost everything. Amaka, scarred but unbroken, now teaches women like her. She says, "He burned my skin to silence me, but I used my voice to burn his lies." The hospital room was quiet, too quiet. Amaka lay still on the bed, her arms and face burning with pain. The hot water had left red, raw wounds on her skin. But even worse was the pain in her heart. Obinna, the man she had trusted, the man she had just married, had done this to her. All because she spoke up during dinner. All because she dared to have a voice. When the nurses and doctors asked what happened, Obinna quickly answered, "It was an accident." His mother stood by his side, nodding. "She knocked over the pot by mistake," they said with fake concern. Amaka wanted to scream the truth, but she could barely speak through the pain. When the doctor left, Obinna's mother leaned in close and whispered, "You will say nothing. If you talk, we will send you back to the village in shame. People will laugh at you. No one will want you again." Amaka's lips trembled, but she said nothing. She felt trapped, scared, alone. Each day in the hospital, Amaka kept silent. Obinna visited sometimes, bringing fake smiles and lies. "You know I didn't mean it," he said softly, trying to sound kind. But she saw the truth in his eyes: he wasn't sorry. He was just scared someone would find out. His mother kept watching her, warning her with her eyes. The nurses were gentle, but no one asked too many questions. Maybe they were afraid too. Amaka didn't blame them. In their world, women were often told to be silent, to accept pain, to carry shame that wasn't theirs. But something inside Amaka had started to change. The pain had woken something deeper than fear. A small voice in her heart began to whisper, "This is not right. This is not your fault. You do not deserve this." Every time Obinna and his mother came into the room, that voice grew stronger. Every time they lied, her anger grew. She stayed quiet on the outside, but inside, she was planning. She didn't know how or when, but she knew she couldn't stay silent forever. She didn't want to be another forgotten woman, another buried voice. One night, when the lights were low and the hospital hallways were empty, Amaka sat up slowly in bed. Her arms hurt, her skin still sore, but she reached for her small phone hidden inside her wrapper. With shaking hands, she opened the recorder app. Her voice was soft, but steady. She spoke about everything: how Obinna poured the water, how his mother blamed her, how they threatened her into silence. She saved the recording in a locked folder, hiding it carefully. It was a small act, but for Amaka, it was everything. It was her truth. Her voice. Her weapon. She didn't know when she would use it, but she knew the day would come. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "They think I'm weak. But I am not. One day, they will hear me." And from that moment, the silence in the hospital was no longer her prison, it became her power. The house was quiet, and the only sound was Obinna's loud snoring in the bedroom. Amaka sat in the corner of the dark room, her arms still aching from the burns. Her face still felt tight from the wounds that hadn't healed fully. But tonight, her heart was louder than her pain. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. Every word. Every threat. Every time he hurt her. Every time his mother told her to keep quiet and be a good wife. She thought about how they made her feel like nothing, like her pain didn't matter. But deep inside, Amaka knew she mattered. Her voice mattered. And tonight, she was going to use it. With shaky fingers, she reached into the fold of her wrapper and pulled out her small, worn-out phone. It was old, the screen cracked in one corner, but it still worked. Carefully, she opened the voice recorder. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. In a soft whisper, she began to speak. She told the phone everything. "My name is Amaka," she said. "And if you are hearing this, it means I finally got away." She spoke about the night Obinna burned her. She described the way he looked at her, like she was a thing, not a person. She spoke about how his mother laughed when she cried, and how they both warned her to stay silent or be sent back to the village with shame. Her eyes filled with tears, but she kept talking. She poured her pain, her truth, and her fear into that tiny device. When she finished, she paused and listened to her own voice. It sounded small, but honest. It was the first time she had told the full truth out loud. She saved the audio file and locked it in a secret folder. She gave it a name no one would ever guess, and added a password only she would remember. Then she placed the phone back into her wrapper and held it close to her body, like a secret treasure. That recording became her hope, her courage, her silent scream in a world that wanted her quiet. Every day after that, she carried her phone like a lifeline. She smiled when Obinna was around, obeyed his mother when needed, but inside, she was waiting. Watching. Planning. That small phone hidden in her wrapper held more than a voice, it held the truth. And one day, that truth would set her free. Each night, she whispered more into the recorder, new insults, new threats, new tears. Her story was growing, piece by piece. And though she felt trapped in that house, she knew she was building something powerful. One day, she would press play. One day, the world would hear what she had been through. And when that day came, no one would ever silence her again. The sun had not yet risen when Amaka made her move. The house was still, and Obinna was deep in sleep. Her heart beat fast, like a drum in her chest. Every step she took felt heavy, but she knew she had to keep going. She had already hidden a small bag under the bed, just a few clothes, her phone, and the little money she had saved from hiding coins over the weeks. But she was not alone this time. A kind nurse from the hospital had seen the truth in her eyes and the pain in her silence. The nurse had whispered one day while changing her bandage, "When you're ready, I'll help you." That day had come. Amaka slipped out of the house just as the sky began to turn gray. The nurse waited near the gate with a long scarf to cover her burns. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. They both knew this was dangerous. But they also knew that staying was more dangerous. They boarded a bus heading to Lagos, sitting in the back, silent and scared. Amaka looked out the window the whole ride, her mind racing. What if he found her? What if he dragged her back? But she held her phone tight in her lap, her voice was in there. Her proof. Her safety. When they arrived in Lagos, the nurse led her to a small women's shelter tucked away on a quiet street. It didn't look like much from the outside, but inside, Amaka saw something she hadn't seen in a long time: kindness. Warm eyes. Soft voices. Women, just like her, with scars on their bodies and stories in their hearts. For the first time, Amaka didn't have to explain her pain. They already understood. No one asked her to be quiet. No one told her to stay for the sake of family. Here, her voice mattered. A young lawyer at the shelter listened to her recording. When Amaka pressed play, her hands were shaking. She felt sick hearing Obinna's voice again. His threats. His hate. "Next time you open your mouth, I'll pour acid," he had said. The lawyer's face turned pale. She stopped the recording halfway and looked Amaka in the eyes. "We will help you," she said gently. "You don't need anyone's permission to get justice." That night, Amaka slept in a clean bed, her phone under her pillow, her heart finally a little lighter. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she was no longer afraid. She had her story, she had support, and for the first time, she had hope. In the silence of the shelter, she whispered to herself, "I'm not going back. Not ever. I am not his property. I am not weak. I am Amaka, and I choose to live." Her journey was far from over, but she had taken the first step. And that step changed everything. The courtroom was full. People whispered as Amaka entered, dressed simply but standing tall. Her scarf gently covered the scars on her face, but her eyes were clear and steady. Obinna sat at the other side, clean-shaven, wearing a suit, trying to look innocent. His mother sat beside him, holding her handbag tightly, whispering prayers under her breath. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Then the case began. Obinna's lawyer stood first, confidently saying, "My client is innocent. The burns were from an accident. There is no proof of any abuse." Obinna nodded quickly, adding, "I love my wife. I never hurt her." People in the room looked confused. Could a man like him really do something so cruel? Then it was Amaka's turn. She stepped forward slowly, holding her cheap phone in both hands. Her heart beat fast, but her voice was steady. "Your Honor," she said softly, "I have something to play." She unlocked her phone, opened the secret folder, and tapped the audio file. The courtroom was silent. Then Obinna's voice filled the room. Loud. Angry. Cruel. "Next time you open your mouth, I'll pour acid on your face," the recording said clearly. There was a sharp gasp from the crowd. A woman in the back covered her mouth in shock. Obinna's mother froze. Her face turned pale. She reached for the bench beside her, then slowly fell to the floor. She had fainted. The judge looked stunned. The lawyer who had been defending Obinna shook his head in disbelief, then slowly stood up. "Your Honor," he said, "I can no longer represent this man." And just like that, Obinna was alone. He tried to speak, to lie again, but the room was no longer listening to him. Everyone was looking at Amaka. The woman they once saw as weak, broken, and silent was now the strongest voice in the room. Amaka stepped back and spoke again, this time louder. "For years, I was told to stay silent. I was told no one would believe me. But I believed me. I knew the truth. And I saved it." Her voice did not shake. She stood tall, not just for herself but for every woman who had been hurt and told to stay quiet. The judge looked at her with respect. "Thank you for your bravery," he said. "We have heard enough." As Amaka walked back to her seat, people in the room began to clap, softly at first, then louder. Even the security guard at the door nodded in respect. Amaka did not smile, but her eyes filled with tears. Not from pain, but from relief. Her voice, once hidden in fear, had now changed everything. Obinna was no longer in control. His lies had broken. And Amaka had finally spoken, not with screams, not with anger, but with truth. Loud. Clear. And proud. Everyone in the courtroom was silent as the judge picked up his papers and looked straight ahead. The air felt heavy. Amaka sat quietly, her hands shaking slightly on her lap, but her face was calm. She had come a long way. From that painful night when hot water burned her skin, to this moment, standing face to face with justice. Obinna sat across the room, no longer confident. His eyes looked tired. His shoulders had dropped. His mother sat beside him, holding her handbag tightly, praying silently. They both looked like they were hoping for mercy. But mercy was something they never gave Amaka. The judge spoke slowly and clearly. This court has listened carefully. The audio proof was clear. The witness statements were honest. Amaka was hurt, abused, and silenced in her own home. But she stood strong. She is not weak. She is not someone's property. She is a human being, and she deserves justice. Amaka felt tears fill her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of relief. The words she never thought anyone would say were finally spoken, out loud, for the whole world to hear. The judge turned to Obinna. You are found guilty of assault, threats, and emotional abuse. You will be sentenced to prison. Your business license is hereby revoked. You cannot run a business when you cannot even protect the people under your own roof. Obinna lowered his head. He didn't argue. He didn't move. For the first time, he had no control, and it showed. Then the judge turned to Obinna's mother. You encouraged this violence. You forced Amaka into silence. You protected your son instead of the woman he was supposed to love. For that, you are charged with abetting abuse. Her hands trembled, and she looked away. There were no excuses left. Her silence, her insults, her cold heart, all of it had finally caught up with her. The judge then looked at Amaka. His voice softened. To you, Amaka. You have shown strength, wisdom, and courage. You did not only fight for yourself. You stood for every woman who has been told to stay silent. For your pain, this court awards you financial compensation. But more than that, we offer you something bigger. A chance to help others. There is a position open at a women's shelter. They need someone who understands pain. Someone who knows how to listen. Someone like you. Amaka could hardly breathe. A job. A new life. A way to turn her pain into power. People in the courtroom began to clap. Some even stood. Amaka looked down, her phone still in her hand, the same phone that once held her secret recordings. Now, it held her victory. She stood up slowly, her legs feeling light. As she walked out of the courtroom, the sun hit her face. The light felt warm. Free. She touched her scars, not with shame, but with pride. They were no longer marks of pain. They were symbols of survival. She whispered to herself, I am not anyone's property. I am my own. And with that, Amaka walked forward into a new beginning. The room was filled with women, some crying, some smiling, all listening. Amaka stood in front of them, the same shelter where she once arrived scared, hurt, and silent. Now, she was no longer hiding. She held a microphone in one hand, her other hand gently touching the scarf that still covered the scars on her face. But today, she wasn't speaking from pain, she was speaking from power. I came here broken, she said softly, but I found strength in my silence, and then I found power in my voice. The women in the room watched her with wide eyes. Many of them had their own wounds, some you could see, some you couldn't. Amaka continued, the man who hurt me thought I would stay quiet. He poured boiling water on me just because I had an opinion. But look at me now, standing, speaking, and healing. Her words were simple, but they shook something deep in everyone. Phones were out. Some women recorded, others just held each other's hands. Her final words went viral across social media, he silenced me with boiling water, but I used my voice to burn his legacy. That line was shared, repeated, and remembered. Amaka had become a symbol of survival, of courage, and of justice. She didn't just escape. She rose. And now, every time she spoke, another woman somewhere in the world found hope to speak too. The truth had shaken the kingdom, but some still needed one final sign, a sign from the spirits, the ancestors, and the old laws of Namboko. The elders gathered and said, if Zara is truly chosen, she must face the trial of the roar. It was an ancient test only the true heir could survive. The trial meant entering the Lion Grove once again, the same sacred place where Zara had been thrown to die 10 years ago. No one ever came out alive, except her. And now, she would return not as a victim, but as the rightful heir. On the day of the trial, the entire kingdom watched in silence. The sun was high, the sky clear, and the gates to the Lion Grove opened slowly. Zara stood tall, dressed in the same lion-marked robes. She walked in alone, unafraid. No weapons. No tricks. Just her and the will of the spirits. Minutes passed. The crowd waited, holding their breath. Then, a roar echoed across the land, deep, loud, powerful. And from the trees came the lions. But they did not attack. They circled Zara, their eyes locked on her. Then, one by one, the great beasts knelt before her. The people gasped. Some cried. The council of elders, watching from the stone steps, bowed their heads. They had seen the answer. The spirits had spoken. Zara turned, her face calm, her heart steady. She walked out of the grove with the lions behind her like royal guards. The crowd dropped to their knees. They chanted her name, not with fear, but with love. She was no longer just a girl, she was their queen. At the edge of the palace, King Damba saw it all. Panic filled his eyes. He turned and tried to run, slipping through the back gate. But guards were already waiting. It was too late. His time had ended. Justice had arrived, not with fire, but with roar, truth, and grace. And the people knew, deep in their souls, that Namboko's true ruler had returned, chosen not just by blood, but by the spirits themselves. The palace was quiet now, but the air was full of emotion. Zara had passed the trial of the roar. The lions had bowed to her. The people had chanted her name with tears in their eyes. The spirits had spoken, and no one could deny it anymore, Zara was the true queen of Namboko. But all eyes now turned to King Damba, who stood trembling before her. His crown sat crooked on his head, his eyes full of fear. Everyone waited to see what Zara would do. Would she punish him with death? Would she take revenge for the lies, the poison, the betrayal? Zara looked at him, calm and strong. She remembered the pain. She remembered the fear, the cold nights in the cave, and the sound of the lions breathing in the dark. But she also remembered the lessons. Truth was her weapon now, not hate. With a clear voice, she said, "You left me to die in the caves. Now, you will live there." Gasps rose from the crowd. Damba's mouth opened in shock. "Not death," Zara continued. "But exile. You will survive the way I did, if the spirits allow it." Guards stepped forward and took Damba away, dragging him toward the very place he thought would be her grave. Then, as the sun rose higher, the drums of Namboko began to beat. Zara walked slowly to the throne, not with pride, but with peace. The people cheered, some crying, some smiling, all united. From a velvet box, the council elder brought out the old crown, Queen Abane's crown, hidden for 10 years, kept safe by those who believed Zara would return. She kneeled. The elder placed the crown on her head, and at that moment, Simba, her lion, let out a deep roar that echoed through the land. It was not a roar of war, but of honor. Zara rose from her knees, now Queen Zara, daughter of Abene, leader of the people. And as she sat on the throne, she did not carry the past with hate, she carried it with wisdom. The kingdom had found its true queen, not through bloodshed, but through truth, courage, and the roar of justice. Queen Zara ruled Namboko with wisdom, kindness, and strength. The pain of the past did not make her bitter, it made her better. She remembered the hungry faces, the silent cries, and the broken trust of the people. So she worked every day to heal her kingdom. She reopened schools and built new ones where children could learn not only about books but also about bravery, truth, and history. Temples that were once filled with fear now became places of hope. Towns that had been forgotten were rebuilt with joy, and many of them were named after moments from Zara's journey, Lion's Mercy, Queen's Path, Spirit's Trial. Everywhere she went, people bowed not just because she was queen, but because they loved her. She didn't need guards in every corner. Her lion, Simba, still walked beside her, proud and calm, reminding all that this was the queen chosen not just by humans, but by the spirits of the land. People wore lion symbols on their clothes and carved them on their doors, not in fear, but in honor. And soon, stories of Zara spread beyond Namboko. Across villages and cities in Africa, people whispered and sang about the girl who was thrown to the lions, but came back with their roar. She became a living legend, a symbol of justice, truth, and strength. Children wanted to be brave like her. Elders told her story by firelight. Zara didn't just rule a kingdom. She gave it a voice again. A voice that roared with pride, not pain. Namboko rose like the sun, shining bright once more, because its queen had faced death, fought lies, and returned not with an army, but with the truth.